Hey everybody, how's it going? So this is the attendance code 6894. Gone ahead and thrown it in the channel as well, right here, as you can see, as well as the question thread. So go ahead and please fill that out. I'm gonna go ahead and post it in the chat too, a few times. How's everybody feeling about the stuff we did yesterday? We're gonna be moving forward from that. And instead of focusing on the, what we did yesterday, for the assignment today, I encourage you to focus on the stuff we're going to be doing today to sort of get an understanding of API connections, because that is essentially what we're going to be covering. We're going to be covering how to connect to an API, the different ways to connect to an API, and how we're going to be getting Twitter database information today. Super important. I'll let you guys give you guys a second to fill out the attendance before I continue and move on to the README. But again, the attendance code is 6894. So yeah, go ahead and fill it out. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about the README today, or what we're going to be doing. So we're going to be talking about consuming data from an API, understanding what an API is. It's an acronym for Application Programming Interface, and how a data-backed application or a data science pipeline typically relies on some type of application program interface architecture. Um, Now, this is an API is going to allow us to collect real-time data, and it also gives us a level of it can also give us a service or some type of engineering feature that allow us to make and process data quicker. We're going to be primarily dealing with data-oriented APIs this week, and more specifically, we're going to be dealing with the Twitter Developer API. But there's a couple of nuances to the third-party API technology that we're using, opposed to the typical TweetPy one that we deal with in previous cohorts. Um, so yeah, so what is an API? It's a great way to get a lot of data. A great way to get a lot of data is through an API. And the idea of an API is actually very general in the sense that it is a sort of third-party application that you connect to, and it sort of provides you with data or some type of service. And I mentioned that beforehand. A lot of apps are built this way, and they've moved from, previously they were built in a more monolithic way in the sense that applications were kind of self-sustained, and most of the code and stuff that you needed in order to get an application up and running was found in the source code. But now a lot of that is outsourced into towards two APIs, whether it be to get data, or whether it be to sort of get some type of third-party service to do things that you don't need to rewrite. The learning objectives for today are going to be connect to the Twitter API, more specifically the third-party Twitter API that we're going to be using, and query tweet by various parameters. We're also going to implement a Spacey NLP model, and if you haven't heard of Spacey before, all it really is an algorithm that will allow us to turn words into vectors, into numeric representations of those words, a collection of um, a collection of different numbers that will represent a specific tweet. And we need that in order to handle unstructured data. And you'll talk about this more in Unit 4, but essentially, um, dealing with words and dealing unstructured data in general, there has to be some type of numeric representation because our models like to utilize numbers when developing a fit and when we train them, right? It's kind of hard just to throw text at a algorithm and expect it to know what the heck is going on. That's where the word to vect and that's where Spacey come in. It sort of allows us to vectorize these tweets and gives us some numeric representation of them so we can perform, in this case, logistic regression model on them. Right? And again, you'll get more into unstructured data later on when you talk about like images and words and different forms of unstructured data and how they can be sort of structured and used to either train a neural network or some type of data science model that you're trying to implement. The task we're going to be going over today is implementing the Twitter API and the Spacey model. Now, we're going to be primarily dealing with this DS API, this Lambda DS Twit Assist.Heroku app, and this allows us to make requests to um, a specific endpoint and therefore get back the information associated with that Twitter handle that we've passed in. And we'll talk about this more. We'll do an exercise today to get an understanding of how endpoints hold information and what it means to sort of make a request. But the assignment is similar to what you did yesterday in the sense that you're just going to be sort of doing this, getting an understanding of the stuff we did during lesson and then moving forward. Um, and making sure that you're at the same point that I am and you understand what's going on and all the code makes sense. And then moving into the next lesson, we are going to be talking about implementing data science into this model or into this application. Now, it's important to note that there's nothing to really turn in this week. At the end of this week, you will be submitting your live application that's been pushed to the cloud, specifically pushed to a Heroku server, and posting it in this thread so that everybody can take a look at your cool app. Um, Now, I would encourage you before you post, maybe on Thursday, since Thursday is a bit of a simpler assignment, to sort of add some additional features. Maybe make it a little bit cooler or add a better model, but it'll be good practice. And plus, it'll look at like a good, unique portfolio piece. Um, yeah, so here's some resources and stretch goals that you might want to check out. Understanding Postman and Flask routing might be good, and maybe utilizing the Twitter scraper in some sense might be good as well. But this is also the Twitter developer account alternative, and there's been some issues recently with the Twitter developer account, which is why we're switching over to this DS API that was developed by one of the students actually, which is kind of nice. Um, pretty, pretty nice. Um, so, are there any questions about the stuff we've done? I'm going to go ahead and stop the poll. Again, the attendance code is 6894. I'll post that in the chat one more time just in case you weren't there to find it. But are there any questions about the stuff we've done or the stuff we're going to do today? No? Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and move forward and talk about what it means to have an API. So let me go ahead and just look up API images, see what we get. Okay, you can see we have a bunch of different things. We have this little API image with a bunch of stuff plugging into it. We got sort of being the center of a lot of stuff, right? Um, well, that's essentially what an API is. API sort of acts as the interface in which you connect to another application. Let's say you want two applications to talk to each other. Let's say um, you want to, communicate with the Twitter database and get information that they might have that you don't. This is where the API sort of acts as the middleman between you and the program or application that you're trying to interact with. Now, you can sort of think of an API as being built over this existing application and allows other applications to interact with it. And most large scale companies or large scale applications have some form of API. You can look at Google Maps, you can look at Facebook, you can look at Twitter, you can look at Amazon, you can look at a large collection of different companies, and chances are they have an API. There's a housing API, the Zillow API, and all this API does is it provides a sort of entry into their database or into their service, right? If we were to go ahead and look at the Zillow API, what we'd see is that we can find information by making a request to a specific endpoint and then getting that information about a specific house back. So let me go ahead and let me show you guys exactly what I mean when I say making a request to a specific endpoint. Please navigate to apilist.fun. I'm going to go ahead and share this with you guys. And we're going to take a short 2-minute break, and you guys can go, not break, you guys are going to be doing something. I want you guys just to go ahead and look through this and then if you find any cool APIs, go ahead and post them into the Slido. So I'm just going to say cool APIs from the link. Go ahead and post some cool APIs that you might find. API list.fun is just a collection of different APIs that you can look at. We have a meme API, a news API, Twilio API, the food API, and all these different APIs allow us to access different information. So if I click on the food API, you can see that you can access over 300,000 recipes and 80,000 food products. And if I go to the API docs, because most APIs have different docs associated with them, you can see that we can provide we have different use cases, and we can provide different endpoints to give us back specific information. If I want to provide specific ingredients, there's a way to do that using the endpoint. Now, I would encourage you to go ahead and take these 2 minutes and just go ahead and take an overlook at all these and maybe see what different services there are that you can use. And we'll be diving into a few of the ones you post in the Slido, as well as a few others that I think are really cool. I'll go ahead and I will give you guys those 2 minutes. Okay, so you guys have posted just a couple. Let's go ahead and take a look and see what we got here. Yep, open. Let's open this one as well. So you guys chose the meme API and the Braille API. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So you can go ahead and let's see, we can generate a meme. Let's go ahead and say things, and you can see that we have this little link that's deployed for us. So if I go ahead and I copy this, I do T and paste this link, you can see that this image is presented. So notice how this endpoint changes, right? If I come up here and I do um, Alan Greenspan, and I just type the top, you can see that this has changed. Meme equals Alan Greenspan, and the top equals things and bottom equals things, which is the text, right? If I come up here and I type ancient aliens, you can see that this meme is now changed to ancient aliens. Now, if I come here and I say um, cheese and cheese, right? Notice how the top and the bottom point of this endpoint change. And remember, we talked about this. An endpoint is just sort of the thing after the .com, after the main domain, right? So we say meme equals ancient aliens meme, and we got top equals cheese, bottom equals cheese, right? And this endpoint changes depending upon the information that we passed here. And if I go ahead and I copy this link and I post it over here, you can see that I get back the same meme. So this information, this sort of meme information, where is it, is stored at this endpoint, right? And depending upon what we put here, it changes the actual endpoint information, right? So let's go ahead and let's copy this and let's put this up here. And if I wanted to change this to, um, you know, rock, I hit enter, I'm gonna get back cheese rock, right? Because I've changed the sort of fundamental thing in the URL, right? If I come up here and I just say rock and rock, you can see I get back rock and rock. If I change this to something else, this meme, then it'll change it to something else, right? Um, this is really interesting because we talked about endpoints yesterday and the fact that they sort of give us the source code for the specific endpoint, right? If I make a request to this endpoint at this location, it gives me back the source code for this page, and then my browser renders that information. Well, it doesn't always have to be sort of some web page or source code. We can request information, right? And if I come to, let's look at the Poke API. If I come to the Poke API and I go ahead and I want to get back some information regarding Ditto, I can go ahead and I can copy this URL. So I'll copy this whole URL right here. This is what we want. And I come here, I paste this, you can see I get back this entire JSON file. And this is sort of how data is processed across the web. It's this JavaScript object notation files, right? And this is an entire file with a collection of different information regarding the Pokemon Ditto. Now you can see that this is the link that's processed, and you can see it's a different endpoint. And if I go ahead and I pass in something like Pokemon or Pikachu, spell that, I think that's right. If I go ahead and submit that, I get back all the information from Pikachu. And you can notice that the endpoint has changed, right? And if I go ahead and copy this, visit our new the new API endpoint, you can see I get back this different information. But this is really important to realize is that it doesn't always have to be some type of source code. We can get back some type of information, some type of image, or any type of data, and then we can sort of save that data, right? And that's sort of what these endpoints sort of give us with APIs is that this in particular is a REST API. If I go ahead and make a request to, I make a request to pokeapi.co and then I do slash and type in, API v2 Pokemon Pikachu, I'm going to get back specific information associated with that endpoint that I've typed in. So we get back, we can use endpoints to sort of store information, and we can have other people access that information through a network call, and they're prompted and given the information that is stored on the server or database, right? Does that make sense? So essentially, these endpoints sort of allow us to store and then access information. And since this is being hosted, this pokeapi.co is being hosted by that domain on another server, when we make a request to a specific endpoint, similar to how we get the source code, we could also get some type of file that we can deconstruct and then store that information. All right, that's essentially what we can do here as well. If we go to the API that we're going to be messing with today, I'll go ahead and copy this and send this to you. We can go ahead and we can go, we got to reply. The meme one. That's dope. Yeah, it's pretty cool, right? You can just generate memes whenever you want, and you can change the sort of URL. And this is what's really cool is that if you wanted to go ahead and make a different request with the meme API, if you wanted to go ahead and fill this information in Python and redirect them to a specific location using the router links, then you can go ahead and generate like a meme or create a meme image and then load that up. So these are why APIs are so nice, is because it sort of offloads a lot of the code that you would fundamentally need in order to build that, right? We can, I mean, that's the whole point of programming, is we're sort of standing on the back of shoulders of Titans, right? So it's like, if you want something, if you found something that you'd like to use, or if you come up with an idea like a meme generator or some random idea, always look to make sure it's out there before you build it from the ground up, because chances are someone else has thought about it. Chances are there's an API that exists for it if it's a common enough problem, right? APIs are very powerful in that way, in that it's sort of similar to how GitHub allows us to sort of look into other people's code. APIs allow us to use other people's code, right? Now, that's super cool. And what I'll be showing you guys today is how we can use stuff like request and then make requests to this URL and get back specific information from that endpoint, right? And then deconstruct that JSON object and turn it into a Python object, because this is just a collection of different keys and values, right? All it really is, just a JSON file. It's just object in JSON format, right? So if we go ahead and go to this API, right, we can see that we have our handle, and we can give a little description. This is a nice description here. We can try it out. So let's go ahead and try it out. So I can type in a Twitter handle here, and let's just go ahead and say Elon Musk, and I go ahead and hit execute, and you can see that I get back the request URL that needs to be made. So if I go ahead and copy this and I go to a new URL, you can see that this will give me back the user Elon Musk. If I want his tweets, I can go ahead. I'm going to get rid of this Pokey API. If I want these tweets, I can go ahead and I can go ahead and grab his specific tweets by copying this and then making a request to the specific tweets. So let me show you guys how we do this. So um, I made the request to Elon Musk. You can see I get back username Elon Musk with this, user / Elon Musk. That's the request that's asking us to make at that specific endpoint. Notice how the domain does not change. It is the same, but there's information stored at that specific endpoint, right? And then we get back 200 of the most recent tweets, and it's post filtering. So we get back a collection of the most recent tweets, right? And it might be different numbers. There's this thing, this is utilizing the Twitter Developer API, which uses a package to make a connection, and we'll be talking about this later. But instead of directly making a sort of request, I'll be talking about this later, but you can also use a package to make a request. And that might be a little bit confusing, but I'll explain it in a moment when we actually sort of start making a request and getting back Twitter users. How about we go ahead and do this real quick? We go ahead and we go to let's go to our REPL, and then let's make a request to this URL to get back this information. And we'll do the same thing with the Pokey API as well. I'll make a request to that, and we'll get back hopefully information about Ditto. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm actually going to do this in VS Code because it might be a little bit easier to understand. I'm going to go ahead and just create a new directory up here, and we're going to call this example. All right, I'm going to save example. I'm going to go ahead and create a new file, right? Or how about I make this in a separate folder so it doesn't come along with the Twitter application. So I'm going to go ahead and in DS next to Twitter-NW Delafu, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make a directory, and we're just going to call this examples. All right, I'm going to go ahead and cd into examples, and then I'm going to go ahead and I don't have anything in there. I'm going to make a file, and we're just going to call this request.py. Examples.py. I'm going to go ahead and make a pip environment real quick just by saying pip env install the one package that we need, which is request. Okay, all I'm doing is installing request, which is going to allow us to make HTTP request, which is it stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol, which is the way in which text is transferred across the web, right? If I make a request, let me go back to this. If I make a request to, this URL to get back this documentation or this web page, I'm sending an HTTP request. You can see here, HTTP, Hypertext Transfer Protocol, and then secure. That's what the S stands for. HTTP, Hypertext Transfer Protocol. What is happening is that how I get back this source code, if we take a look at it, how we get back this source code is coming through some type of hypertext transfer protocol. You can see view source HTTPS. We are basically viewing the source code of the page that was transferred through this hypertext transfer protocol. And this is how text is transferred. It's like if I make a request to the server and they prompt me with the source code or a JSON file, that request was made using HTTP methods, and HTTP methods are similar to the CRUD operations that we know. If I go ahead and look up HTTP methods, and we can see that we have a collection of different methods. We have, where is it? We have get, head, post, put, delete, right? And essentially get is retrieving information, so it is similar to reading. Think about the CRUD operations: create, read, update, and delete. These are all things that you can do with APIs as well as databases, right? So I can retrieve information. I can, again, retrieve information using head. I can post information, which is creating information, and then I can put data, which is going to be updating information, and then I can delete data, which is going to be deleting information, which is really cool, right? So HTTP performs similar to the create, read, update, and delete operations that we know and love, but it's just more in the context of its network and server request. I can get information from a server, I can post information to a server, I can update information to a server, and I can delete information from a server, or I can just retrieve a specific resource from a header, right? So that's all something that I can do using HTTP requests, and that's important to note because that's how I modify network, or that's how I modify servers, or sort of put things in information into the cloud, right? I have a Facebook account and I'm uploading a post, I'm going to be posting, right? That's kind of where it comes from. I'm going to be posting data to the server. I'm posting this new information, and now it's stored on the Facebook server, and other people can access that when they sort of look at the feed and look at the different information that's presented to me. Does that make sense? Are there any questions about this or anything that needs to be clarified? Because it's kind of a confusing concept, and I'll give you guys like a 5 or 10 seconds to sort of process it until we move on to the example of using the request library to make a request to the URL. Any questions? Okay, no questions? All right, let's go ahead and let's do this then. I'm going to go ahead and navigate to the terminal again. And we can see our pip environment was installed. I'm going to go ahead and open up a new VS Code terminal or a new VS Code window just to open up the examples that I have. There we go. And I'm going to go ahead and just code a few things into examples. So we've imported this. I should probably activate my pip environment as well. Pip environment shell. We have in our pip file, we now have the request library. And this will allow us to make requests. I'm going to go ahead and share this documentation with you guys and show you exactly what you might want to look at. Let's just look up request library Python. We'll say request library Python. I go ahead and Google that, request.pippy. This is not what we want. We want the docs. Haha, here we go. So docs.pythonrequest.org. So this is how we make requests. I'm going to go ahead and share this with you guys. That's the documentation. You can see hold the power of request. So you say r equals request.get. We make a request to some URL, and then we can pass in some authentication if we need it. We can see the status code just by doing our status code, and we can check out the headers, which are just sort of URL specific things that we're not going to dive too deep into. I encourage you, if you want to know more about URLs structures, then just look it up. Because it's not essential as a data scientist, and it's not super essential for making API requests, at least in terms of data. Um, so we can see we can deconstruct it as a JSON, we can turn it into a text file, or we can just get the encoding in which the JSON request was made. Let me go ahead and show you guys exactly how this functions. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull up the request examples.py. I'm gonna import request. All right, I'm gonna import request examples. All right, cool. And then I'm just going to go ahead and make a doc string, and we're just say an example of a URL request. All right, example of getting data through a URL request. All right, so we have that. I'm just going to go ahead and say R, and I'm going to say request, and then we can go ahead and say .get. And what .get does is .get is going to, remember the HTTP methods? It's going to get information, right? We're not posting anything here. We're not changing anything fundamental about the Poke API request for Ditto. We're not changing anything about this um, JSON file we have. We're just trying to get this information so we can see information about Ditto. And I can do the same thing with the Twitter API that we're going to be using today. I can go ahead and make a request to the DS API and get back information about the user Elon Musk, as well as a collection of his tweets. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and just show you guys what we're going to be doing when we're sort of importing stuff from the API, because these are all real-time tweets. These are the most recent tweets that Elon Musk has had, right? You can see his ID and username. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go to VS Code. I'm going to go ahead and put this in a string. We're going to say HTTP lambda ds tweet assist heroku app user Elon Musk, and then we're going to go ahead and just leave it like that. And now I'm going to get back a status code. And status codes come in the forms of 200, 400, and 500s, as well as a collection of others. And it basically just informs us whether or not the request is valid. So I'm going to go ahead and make a print statement. And I'm going to go ahead and say print. And we're going to want to print the following information. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and pass in the information for format. So we're going to go ahead and if we go ahead and take a look at the request message, you can see I can get back the status code. And this status code, if we go ahead and look at a status code of 200, means success. If I look up 200 status code, we can see that it means that it was a successful request and the request was made. HTTP 200 OK, status code responding against that the request has succeeded, which means if we get back a 200 request code or status code, then we should know that the request has succeeded and we now have information in the variable R. So I can say r.status code. This will format and say that we have made the status code there. And I can go ahead and deconstruct this by saying r.json. If we go ahead and take a look, it will turn this value that we have here that we get back, because what we're going to be getting back is we're going to be deconstructing this, where is it? I'll go ahead and copy this. We're going to be basically copying this information that we get back from this endpoint, which is just a collection of his different tweets. And you can see it sort of looks like a collection of key value pairs. This is not in Python format. This is a JSON in JavaScript format, okay? Which means that this is an object notation for JavaScript. But what's cool about requests is it has a built-in method that allows us to deconstruct that into a Python dictionary. So we can say this turns the JSON file into a Python dict. All right, so we can go ahead and save this as r dict. Okay, and we can go ahead and say em. That's something different. We'll say Elon Musk dict. Cool. So we're getting back that dictionary regarding Elon Musk's tweets. I'll just leave it as Elon Musk, and then let's go ahead and print out Elon Musk's information. All right, so we're just going to do that. And I'm going to go ahead and run this, and we will see if we succeeded in making a request of this URL and deconstructing this into the proper, into its proper parts and turning it into a Python dictionary so we can make a request of specific keys. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the terminal. I'm going to go ahead and clear this up, open up this code, and we're just going to say, I'm going to say Python request examples.py. Right? And it made the request. Look, this is the exact same information we get back as we get here. So we can make a request to a URL outside of a sort of browser, and we can use Python in order to deconstruct that and get back a dictionary that Python knows and loves, and we can utilize. So I could even call in specific information from this. Like say, since it's a Python dict, I can go ahead and say .keys, right? And if I go ahead and run this again, I get back the keys associated with the Elon Musk dict, right? So we can go ahead and we can see built-in method keys of dict object. I should actually have to call it like this. So if I go ahead and save that, I go ahead and enter, you can see I get back the associated keys with that Python dictionary, right? So I'll just give it a moment, it's taking a second. We can see we get back the dict keys Twitter handler and tweets. And if we see, we have Twitter handler here, which is a key that is associated with another dictionary. And then we have tweets, which is another key associated with a list of tweets. So we go ahead and grab that tweets value and see what we get back, because this is a dictionary. So I can make a key call and just say Elon Musk dict tweets. And then I can save that. I'll go ahead and run this again. And what we should get back is we should get back a collection of all of Elon Musk tweets. So I'm going to clear this up. I'm going to say ls. I'm going to go ahead and say Python request example.py. And then I get back all of the tweets that Elon Musk has said, including their ID from Twitter. Now, what's important to note, I want this to be extremely clear, is these are real tweets. These are coming directly from the Twitter database. Now, this sort of thing that we're using as the middleman is an API that utilizes the Twitter developer account. So similar to the account that you guys be using, it just sort of utilizes TweetPy, which is a package that allows us to, we can install TweetPy, which is a package that allows us to indirectly make API URL request, endpoint request, right? So if you think about it, I have to do this directly, right? This is sort of a direct way of me getting information, is making a direct request to the URL and then deconstructing that JSON file. What TweetPy does, which is really cool, is it's a package that has been community developed, which if I go ahead and look it up, which allows us to make direct requests to the Twitter database. So right now we're making a request to this DS API, which is making a request through TweetPy to the Twitter database. So we basically have two middlemen here, opposed to if we would just use the Twitter developer account, we could just make a direct request using TweetPy to the Twitter database, utilizing the Twitter developer account that you need to sign up for, that you could have signed up for. Right, and this is all this basically is this TweetPy sort of allows us to use methods and attributes to make URL requests without actually making them. Right, so if we go ahead and go to getting started, you can see that you need your API key and all that kind of stuff, but we don't need an API key here because we're just using a third party to sort of directly make the request. But if we go ahead and see, we can get specific users. We can see we have Twitter, get the user object for Twitter. So if I say user equals API.getUser, we could pass in Elon Musk there and then get back the tweets and information associated with Elon Musk, which is really interesting. And then we can take that information and we can sort of use it similar to how we're using request, right? What we get back from this API.getUser and passing in Elon Musk is similar to what we get back here, which is just a dictionary or list of Elon Musk tweets and Elon Musk information. We now have far more information if we're using the Twitter API developers account. This sort of just gives us the bare bones that we need in order to code the application. But it's important to note that in order to make a request, we don't necessarily need to primarily use the URL endpoint request. We can instead use a third-party package such as TweetPy that'll sort of in the background make the request for us, right? And that's super important to know, is that we don't really there's these packages that exist, and there's a package that exists for Facebook, there's a package that exists for TweetPy, there's a package that exists for Google, and it makes making URL requests easier because there's these built-in methods that do a lot of the stuff that we already want to do, right? Um, is there any questions about that, about what I'm saying so far, before we move on to a couple more examples? Okay, you guys are feeling comfortable with this stuff? Again, any questions about anything regarding APIs? It all makes sense. All right, when we make a request here, we get back this dictionary that we can deconstruct. If I want to grab a specific tweet, since this is a list of tweets, this key value pair, this key tweets is associated with a list, right? So if I want to grab the first index from that list, I can go in here and I can say 0, and I can get back the first tweet, all right? We see that, we get back, the request was made with status code 200, successful, ID, blah, 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 full text. We can go ahead and grab the full text since each of this list is a collection of different dictionaries, and that dictionary for each of these tweets has an ID and a full text. So I can go and come in here, and the first tweet, I can get the full text information by saying full text, and then saving that, and then going ahead and running it again. And you can see I just get back the text of Elon Musk tweet, which is from the top of Starbase High Bay. And this is a real-time live tweet that Elon Musk has most recently tweeted. Super cool, right? Are there any questions about that? Okay, cool. I'm going to assume you guys are good then, and we're going to go ahead and we are going to navigate back to VS Code, and I'm going to run us through one more example. I'm going to come up here and say, this is a Twitter example. This is a Twitter example. All right, a Twitter user example, pulling info about Elon. Cool. Now, if I wanted to do something with the Poke API, we can go ahead and we can look through some documentation. So this is an example with the Poke API. Now, I'm going to go ahead and show you guys. Let's come here. So if we go back to the poll that we had ran, the cool APIs from the link, I go ahead and look at this. You can see we have a collection of different APIs. Now, APIs, the endpoint requests that you make are going to be different. I mean, that makes sense, right? We're not going to query Elon Musk to get back information about Ditto. That wouldn't make sense. The websites that we use, so pokeapi.co, for instance, this API has a specific layout and a way in which they'd like you to make endpoint requests. And this is all specified in their documentation, right? We can come here and we can see, if we go to the API v2, we can see that we have this information right here. Collection of different things. We can make requests regarding, there's a request about berries, there's a request about berry firmness, there's a request about berry flavors, there's a request about, we see we have groups and then endpoints, we have contest types, so all different contests that exist within the Pokemon world. If we come down here to encounters, we can see all the different encounters that have come along in the Pokemon world, so like specific locations and all this different types of stuff. Walking in a tall grass or cave, and then we have specific things associated with that, right? We have encounter conditions in which we know whether or not we're getting swarmed. So all these different things that are all accessed at these different endpoints. You can see this is a different endpoint than this one, and so on. So we can go ahead and come into this documentation and see what endpoint requests we can make in order to get back specific information. Before I go ahead and click on, this Hampton Roads one that you guys sent, and I go ahead and come into API docs, I can go ahead and take a look at the documentation and see exactly what's going on. Oh, site can't be reached. Interesting. Let's go ahead and check out this one then, the drone deploy, see what this one says. Go to API docs, and let's take a look. It looks like that last web page was down. If I come in here, I can see the drone data platform. Developers build, grow, and monetize your apps with the full power of drone deploy, drone data platform. So if I go in and click build an app, I don't really know what this is. We have a collection of different information regarding about the requests that can be made. Oh, it just looks like where drones were deployed. That's kind of cool. So if we come to the introduction, we can see we have API here. We can get an understanding of the authentication and the stuff that takes place. So we can see we can get back specific information. This is all GraphQL. This is a little bit more complicated. There's two different architectures that exist: REST APIs and GraphQLs, and actually there's a lot of different ones. But yeah, so we can come in here and we can see how to make a request to drone deploy, right? And some of these require authentication, right? And authentication typically takes the form of API keys and API key secrets. And what an API key is it's sort of like a username. And an API key secret is sort of like your password. Right? So when I need to make a request to this drone deploy API, they grant me, my computer essentially, not me, they grant my computer an API key and an API key secret. And I need to pass those in when I'm making a request to the URL in order to get back this information because it's secure, right? Like they want to know, especially for Facebook and Twitter and all these different other companies that sort of have these their own APIs, they want to know when and what kind of requests are being made, right? Think about it. They need to sort of map me out, right? If I make a request about something nefarious or something that might be a little dangerous for the company, they want to be sure that they know which user was doing that. And that's why we have this sort of username API key linked to us. And in order to use that API key, it makes sense that we need some type of password, the API key secret key, the API secret key, in order to make that request, because then we get authenticated and we can say, okay, this person belongs to this username or this API key, and we know that the requests that they are making, we know the requests that are being made with this API key, and it tracks to this IP with this in this location. So they're sort of monitoring who is making a request to what, depending upon these API keys and API key secrets. We don't need to pass that into this DS API because we sort of made it and it's fine if anybody accesses it, but we would need to go ahead and do it for something like we're just directly accessing the Twitter API, right? Like if you think about it, Twitter doesn't want anybody to have access to it, which is why you get to sign up for an account. And when you do, you get an API key and an API key secret, which sort of acts as your username and password to make these requests so they can map who you are and what you're doing, right? Any questions about that before we actually start coding? We're going to probably take a 5-minute break right here, and then afterwards we can get back into it. Any questions at all? How does JSON turn into a dictionary? Is it automatic with the API? So no, it's not automatic with the API. It's automatic with this package that we're using. We're importing request here, right? It's automatic when we say r.json. So this isn't turning it into a JSON file. This is taking a JSON file and turning it into a Python dictionary, which is why we can treat it like a Python dictionary down here on line 11, right? This is when we make this request. This is a JSON. This is in JSON format, right? And we need to deconstruct this and turn it into a Python dictionary because Python knows how to deal with Python dictionaries. It doesn't know how to deal with JavaScript objects, right? So this .json might be a bit confusing. It's saying we want to turn this from a JSON object into a Python dictionary. it might be making more sense if we said something like .pydict, right? This would turn it into a Py dictionary. It's just taking a JSON file and turning it into a Python dictionary. All right. Does that make sense? Yeah. Cool. It's not automatic with the API. It is a method that is built in to request that allows us to do that. All right. Cool. There's actually one more thing I want to do. We might as well do this now during the break so it loads. I'm going to go ahead and go into our previous repository. I'm going into twitoff-nw.foo. Again, just here, where my pip file is at, where the twitoff application is at. And we're just going to go ahead and install a few things. So I'm going to go pip and install. We want to install Spacey, and we want to install python-.env. And python-.env will allow us to handle environment variables, which I'll be talking about later. If you remember that .env file that was being ignored in the get ignore yesterday, this is sort of what it's hinting at. It allows us to handle environment variables. So all we need to do is pip env install Spacey and python-env. I'm going to go ahead and share this file with you guys as well. But this is the command that you should run in order to install into your environment. And then here is the request example of code. So maybe take a look at that if you aren't feeling comfortable with it during break. That. Cool. And I never did the Pokey API example. So maybe go ahead and what I want you guys to do during break is this little exercise of going to the Pokemon API. Where did it go? Going to the Pokemon API and practicing making a request. And when we get back, I'll go ahead and walk you guys through how to make a request. Let's say we make a request to Squirtle. That's what I want you guys to do. I want you to get back the information or the JSON file, deconstruct it into a Python dictionary, and print out just the Squirtle name. Just print out Squirtle's name. That's all I want. You can see here that we have, go ahead and submit this. You can see here we have name ditto. So all I want you to do is grab the specific key associated with this value and print that out to your console using inside of this this request examples.py. So I will be waiting for you guys to do that. Here's the API, and I will see you in 5 minutes. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's now focus on this API call that we make with Pokemon. So I'm just come in here, and all we have to do is that we say R, um, we'll say poke R equals request dot get, and all we have to do is we just need to copy this URL, but instead of saying Pokemon, we just want to get Squirt. Squirt. So, all right, not too bad. We can go ahead and we can print out this exact same status code message. Say print r, let's say poker poker status code, and we can go ahead and deconstruct this poker and say dot JSON, turning it into a Python dictionary, and then we just say Wordle dict equals poker JSON, and then we can go ahead and print out that Squirtle dict, and we want to grab his name. So if we just go ahead and take a look at, we can take a look at the keys, or we can take a look at the itself, we can see that it is hidden underneath name. If I go ahead and just type name, save that, and I go ahead and run this file and say, let's go ahead and back to where we previously were. I go into examples, and I say Python request example for Pi. I print out the name Squirtle. The request is made with status code 200, and we get back the name Squirtle. Cool. That's all how we do that. I'm gonna go ahead and copy this and send this to you guys, and just gonna edit this existing message and put this here. Cool. Sweet guys. So that is that. Any questions about this so far? And then we'll go ahead and moving on to actually using this API, this Elon Musk API, to grab the tweets and put them into our database. Any any idea at all? No? Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and let's go to VS Code again. I'm going to get rid of this little window and we're just going to open up the previous one that we had, which is where our application is. I'll give you guys a second to navigate here. All right, and all we're going to do is we're going to make a new file in Twitoff, and we're just going to say new file, and we're just going to say, we're just going to call this twitter.py. All right, we have twitter.py. I'm going to go ahead and up here and say retrieve and request tweets from the DS API. Cool. So that's all we're doing. Now I am missing something. I have not installed the request. We need to install request, or have I installed the request? Let's check out the file. No, I did not install request. So we need to install requests into our twitoff-nw.foo. I'm going to go ahead and say pip env install, and all we need to install is request. Oh, I misspelled install. We're going to install request. Cool. So we just need to install request. I'll go ahead and change this up here to include that. So we need to now also install request, right? Save that change. Cool, cool, cool. We now have request. Look at that. It's locking. And we are going to import it here. And then once this is done locking, we can continue. Oh, I guess we can continue now. It's not the end of the world. It's not installed yet. We're going to go ahead and just say from.models and import a few of the things we need. Import models. We're going to import DB, import wheat. I'm going to import user. Remember, this is all stuff that we made in our models.py yesterday, right? We have from models, import all of that stuff, and then we're just going to go ahead and say Twitter users equals, actually that's not pre-populate with Twitter users. How about we instead just go ahead and create a function that will add and update tweet. So we're going to come down here and just go ahead and create a function called create, or let's say add or update user, and this is going to be a function that add or updates user depending upon the username we pass in. So add and update the user with handle with Twitter handle username to our database. Fantastic. Add or update user with Twitter handle username to our database. And then we're going to go ahead and cool. So we've gotten that. And then we are going to go ahead and we are going to start adding this user, and all we need to do is we need to say r equals, or we'll say user equals request dot get, and we're going to make a request to the username specified here. We can do this if we go back to the example that we previously had. Um, I guess I closed it, but if you remember, all we did was we just passed in the URL here, okay? Um, and instead of passing in Elon Musk, we're just going to format it so that we have the name username here, right? So we need to go ahead and pass it in at the endpoint. And if I come to the DS API documentation, we can see that all we need to do in order to make a request is replace Elon Musk with the Twitter username that we want. Let's just go ahead and double check this out. So Jack Black is a simple one. Let's go ahead and let's see if we get back Jack Black's tweets. Boom, we get back all of Jack Black's tweets. So we can go ahead and we can just say we pass in username here. So all we need to do is change the endpoint here of the username that we're trying to call. So I can just come in here and paste that, and we should be good to go. And now I can make a request directly to this username that we've passed into this function. It's kind of nice. And then I can deconstruct this, and I can say something like, um, we're going to say user. I'll just call this request instead, and then we'll go ahead and set user down here by saying user equals r.json. Okay, does that make sense? So all we're doing is returning this request um, into user. Now, if this username doesn't exist, we want to go ahead and we want to say something about that. We want to raise that issue by saying if db dot, or we can handle this error later because I think it'll be more apparent when we actually come to it. But there's another thing that we should do. We should probably go ahead and make sure that this user isn't already in our database. And we're going to do a very unique thing here by saying db user, and this is very Pythonic. We're going to say db user equals user.query dot get, and we're going to try and get this user by their user ID, right? So we want to go ahead and provide some type of we want to see if this user exists first off, so we're going to go ahead and pass in username dot the username, oh, username dot, we get this request back. So we want this request to be up here. I'm going to explain this in a moment. I think it makes more sense when I code it. Most of this is hindsight, right? So we're going to say db user equals user.query.get username. We're going to go ahead and want to deconstruct that. So we're going to set user equal to this request that we made, right? User equals r.json, and then we're going to go ahead and say user dot, and then if we go ahead and take a look at the API, what information we get back, we can see if we look up a user like Elon Musk, since he has less tweets, it might be less complicated to look at. We can see we get back the username Elon Musk. Cool. So we want to grab that specific information. So I'm going to come in here and say Twitter, Twitter handle, Twitter underscore handle, Twitter underscore handle, and then from that we want to grab the user ID, so we can say ID, and this is going to search our database for a user that has this specific information, right? And then if we don't get anything back and we get back an empty list, then we're probably going to want to add this user to our database by saying user ID equals um, user, then we want to pass in Twitter handle, and then ID. And I might, just to save time, come up here and instead say uh, user ID and set that equal to this value here, just so we don't have to reference it twice and we can make this look a bit nicer. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this. And we're going to go ahead and say user ID. Cool. So I'm going to say user ID. I can say the same thing here. We're just going to say user ID. And there we go. Okay. And then we want to pass in ID. So we want to create an object from this. We want to say ID equals user ID, and we want to say name equals the username that was passed in. Now, take a second and look at this code, and I want you guys to sort of deconstruct it, and then I'll go into explaining. So does this make sense? So this is the point in which this either creates, so the grab, or creates effectively, effectively grabs or creates a user for our database. Okay, so take a second, and then I want you guys to look at this and um, really try and figure out what's going on here. I'll give you a hint. We're using a conditional or statement, and then once you are done looking at it, I'll give you guys like a couple seconds. I'll explain it. Okay, so let's explain what's going on here. So we are grabbing that user from that request that we made to that URL with that specific username. We're grabbing his user ID, and then we're going to search our database using user.query.get. And what .get is going to do is it's going to try and find the user with a specific ID, and that ID is the one that is coming directly from the Twitter database. So we're using the exact same Twitter ID. Elon Musk has this ID when he was created in the Twitter base. We're using that same ID and trying to find and see if he exists inside of our current database that we have, right? That's why we're saying user.query.get user ID, because if he already exists in our database, we don't want to re-add him, right? So this will return back a empty list if he does not exist in our database, and that evaluates to false, right? And this is what a conditional or statement is if the first part of the statement is true for an or statement, then it's not going to execute the second part. So if he is in fact in our database, then this will return back a full list, which will be true, which will evaluate to true in a Boolean sense. And this second part of the statement will not be executed, which means that if the user exists, then we're going to grab him from our database. If he doesn't exist, then we're going to move on to this statement. And this statement is going to create an object with the specified user ID that we got from that request that we made from the URL, from the API. And it's going to set the username equal to the username that we passed in, right? So does that make sense? Any questions about that? All we're doing here is instantiating a new user if they don't exist already in our database after making this query. It's a very Pythonic way to do it, so if it doesn't make sense, please let me know. Okay, cool. So now we're going to go ahead and grab this user's tweets. But first, I want to add this user to our database by saying um, db.session add, and we're going to want to add that DB user that we get back. And there's a certain trend that you should realize is that whenever I call something with the prefix DB, know that it's going to eventually be added using this db.session.add. So I'm going to say db.session.add, which will add this user to our existing database that we have here into this SQLite database that we've put that we have yet to create. I'm going to go ahead and say db session.add, and we are going to say this adds the DB user to our database. Cool. Now we've gone ahead and added that user. I'm going to go ahead and grab the tweets by saying tweets equals, and we want to grab the tweets from this value we got back. So we're going to say user. We go ahead and take a look at this request. Um, uh, One sec, I'll answer that question in a moment. We want to grab the tweets list. So I'm going to come in here and say user, and we want to grab the tweets dictionary value, right? The tweets key. Okay. We're going to grab back all of the tweets, and they're going to be stored in a list. And then we're going to want to go through each of those tweets and add each of them to our database. So I can go in here and I can say for tweet in tweets. And then we will continue to go through this after I've answered this question. User ID for Twitter wouldn't be a numeric value. Yeah, it would. Why would it not be a numeric value? Because the user ID, oh wait, would it not be? Am I grabbing the ID? Yeah, the ID is a numeric value. But you see I'm grabbing Twitter handle, which is this key, which is pointing to a dictionary. And then I'm grabbing the ID, which is a numeric value here, 441963697. And this is the ID linked to the row of Elon Musk in the Twitter database. And we're just going to go ahead and copy paste that exact same ID into our database that we've created here. But yes, it is a number. Why do you think it would not be? Maybe specify.
I was just thinking it might be like a username compared to. So sometimes you'll have a username and then you'll have like an account name. And I was thinking maybe the user ID might be more like an account name per se, and then the username might be like the username, if that makes sense.
Got you. Yeah. So the Twitter handle is referring to the user name. So if we come up here, we can see that we have like the username. The Twitter handle, that's kind of a confusing word for it, but username is the screen name of the user, and this ID is the ID associated with that user on the Twitter database. Um, so ID is a number, and then username is the screen name text. All right, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, sweet. So we're going to go ahead and iterate through all of these tweets. All I'm going to say is db tweet. We're just going to create another db tweet object, and I'm going to be adding this to our database. And all I need to do is say tweet. We need to create this object so we can then add it, say tweet, and we need to pass in. If we go ahead and take a look at our models.py, you can see that for tweet, we need to pass in an ID, a text, and a user. So I'm going to go ahead and say ID equals. We want to grab that tweet text. So I'm going to say tweet because we want to grab the individual tweet and we want to grab full text. So it's going through each one of these dictionary values. So I can say tweet and then pass in the value full text. And this will grab all the text from the single tweet. Oh, this is for ID. My bad. We want to grab instead of not we don't want to grab full text. We want to grab ID, that ID key. I'm going to go ahead and grab ID here. And but for text, we want to grab full text. So I'm going to say tweet, and then we're going to pass in full text. Cool. So we're grabbing the full text. And the last thing we need is a user. The user ID is going to get automatically filled. We're going to go ahead and pass in that user object that we made, which is db user, right? So we're going to come here. We're going to do db user. All right. Just going to set that equal to db user because that is the user that made this text, right? We could do that, or we can do another thing, which is pretty cool. And this is what the back reference is going to allow us to do. Is instead we can say db user dot tweets, which is this sort of new value that holds all the tweets. And since it's a list, we can append that. We can append that tweet that we just made, right? Which is weird. And this will add it to our database real time. All I need to do is go ahead and now say db.session.add db tweet because this can be a null value. It doesn't have to be full, right? So we're going to add that tweet similar to how I added the user. And then we're going to go ahead and commit all these changes at the end by saying db.session.commit. Cool. We've committed those changes, and it looks like everything is working as intended. All right. So db.session.add, and then we're adding that user, and we are going to head and then we are going to add that user, and we are going to commit those changes. And we've committed those changes, and now let's go ahead and see if this works as intended. I'm going to come up here. We got Flask app equals twitoff flash shell from twitoff.twitter. Um, is the thing that we want to import. We want to, or from Twitter, we want to import add or update user, right? Into our into our terminal so we can go ahead and mess around with it. So I come up here to the terminal and I'm going to clear this up and I'm going to enter my flash shell by saying flask app equals twit off and then saying flask shell. Okay, so I'm setting it equal to flash shell and then I'm going to go ahead and enter. And oh, get that flask. So I'm going to go ahead and use the Python REPL since we're running into that issue, which is kind of annoying. So I thought I fixed that, but I guess it's just Python still being annoying. I'm just going to go ahead and enter the Python REPL in the Python shell, so we should be good. I'm going to go ahead and say from twitoff.twitter import add or update user. So we're going to access to this function I just made. So I'm going to say add or update user. Module name Flask. What is it complaining about? Not in my Oh, I'm not in the correct. I need to exit out of my current pip environment. I'm in examples. I need to be in this pip environment. Not even in the right location. Shoot. So I'm going to go to DS27. Sorry about this, guys. I'm going to go into twitoff-nw.foo, activate this pip environment that we have inside twitoff-nw.foo, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say I'm going to go ahead and then enter the Python REPL, and I'm going to say from twitoff.twitter import add or update user. Okay, so we're going to add or update user from twitoff.models. What is it complaining about? Models cannot import name tweet. Oh, did I misspell tweet? I may have. Aha, this needs to be a capital T. My mistake. All right, let's go ahead and run this again. Cool. We're going to go ahead and add or update user. It's working as intended. And all the user we want to add is, let's add Elon Musk. Okay. We'll go ahead and do add or update user, Elon Musk. Hit enter. And we get back an issue. No application found. Either work inside view function or push an application context. They're getting that SQL alchemy error. Let me go ahead and see what's going on. Probably activate Flask app equals to Flash shell. Why is it not recognizing Flask SQL alchemy? Okay, there we go. Okay, I don't know. Weird. All right, well, I guess it's working. Let me go ahead and import this again. So I'm gonna say, we're gonna want to import this guy. So we're gonna say from quit off dot Twitter import add or update user. All right, then we're gonna go ahead and say add or update user, and we're gonna add Elon Musk. And let's see if this works. So we get back an error. No such table user. Select user ID. And I don't know if you guys have noticed this before. It may have been an issue yesterday when you're trying to insert example users, but we need to create our database. If you can see here, we haven't created it yet. We have not created the SQLite database. Right now, it's just pip file, pip.file.lock, readme, docket ignore, and all these different files. We don't see the SQLite database that we've been trying to create in app.py. You can see it's here, SQLite db.sqlite3, right? So we need to go ahead and create this by saying db. I should probably import the database. So we're going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to go to models.py, and I'm going to say from quit off dot models import db. Okay, I'm going to import db, and all I have to do is run db.createAll, and this will create my database. This is super important to realize, guys. If you run into this no such table user or no such table or no such column, no such row or anything like that, all you have to do is do db.createAll to create the database, and we're going to see it populate right here. When I go ahead and run db.createAll, you can see it's populated there. Fantastic. So I'm going to go ahead and we can also do db.dropAll, and this will drop everything that exists within our database. And when we do this, it'll completely recreate the database. So that's how we drop, and that's how we create a database. Okay, so that's using SQL Alchemy as well. So I'll go ahead and send you guys those requests, db.createAll, and then we got db.drop. Okay, and those, I'll go ahead, creates the database, and that's drops the database. All right. So now we got to go ahead and we are going to see if that user exists. I'm going to say db, I'm going to say db.createAll to create our database, db.createAll, and I'm going to go ahead and I am going to, then I'm going to try and add or update this user again. So say add or update user, and we are going to add or update the user Elon Musk. So I'll say add or update user. We're going to pass in Elon Musk, and we should now have the user Elon Musk in our database, and I can go ahead and query by this, and I can say user.query.all. You can see we get back user is not defined, so we should probably import user. So I'm going to say from quit off, from quit off models import uh, user. All right, so we're going to import user, and I'm going to say user.query.all. And when we get back, Elon Musk. So Elon Musk is now in our database, and I can grab him specifically using filtering by saying something like user.query.filter, and we can filter user